Okay, all right, let's go. We were just talking, everyone, and I was about to say it, and I just want to say it with you guys here. But Keith, the work that you're doing is so meaningful. It is so humbly powerful in the transformative effects and the not just effects on the ground, not just effects in practice, but the effects on the mindset of the people you work with. I appreciate it. I'm getting chills. Just I'm so happy to be here with you because this is such an important thing, and it also shines a light on how we really need to be interacting with the world around us, looking for these pure, clearly powerful,
Yeah.
and regenerative methods. And cover crops is it. But you've gone to, and taken to another level. So I'm so excited to dig in with you today on this. Thank you for being here, Keith.
Sure, it's great to be here, Matt. It's our honor. And yeah, our business is selling cover crops. Our passion, our mission is to help people regenerate God's creation for future generations. And cover crops are one way that, people can do that. It's the way that we help people with the most. But, as you well know, there's lots of things that make up that regenerative system. And we're just blessed to be able to, offer cover crop seed, diverse seed mixes as a part of that.
Yeah, but you also help people with strategies, with mixes, with new paradigms around, and that's really what I want to dig in today is on the paradigm shifts that your business has embraced and has really become an educational vehicle for the entire, agricultural regenerative ag movement. It's amazing. But when did this start? How did
Yeah.
you get into cover crops?
Well, interesting story. So my brother and I, we're here in South Central Nebraska, Bladen, Nebraska, tiny little town. It's the farm that we grew up on. So I'm living in the house that I grew up on. My brother's just right next door. So we're farming, like 1,800 acres here, some irrigated, some dry land. And you know, when I graduated from college, I went and taught school for 10 years. So I was an ag teacher, and then I kind of morphed over into doing computers and technology and things like that. And my brother started farming right out of college. Well, after 10 years of teaching, my dad decided he was going to retire. And so then Audrey, my wife, and I moved our kids back to the farm because we always in the back of our mind thought, we really want to raise the kids on the farm. I mean, there's no better place, no better environment to raise your family. And so we did. We moved back to the farm, and at that point, my brother was heavily experimenting with no-till and no-till practices. This would have been the, mid to late 90s, and so that was really starting to come on. So we got very involved in the no-till organization, No-Till on the Plains. He was on the board. I did their website and a lot of their tech work. So we knew Gabe Brown, we knew Jay Fuhrer, we knew all these guys before we ever started GreenCover through these no-till organizations. And so, Jill Clapperton, all these people we were very familiar with. And so in 2008, or I'm sorry, 2006 was a big moment because the No Till on the Plains brought in a guy named Ademir Caligari. Ademir, probably one of the top cover crop minds in the world. He's from Brazil. So he came to No Till on the Plains and he was speaking and sharing these pictures and these stories of these farmers in Brazil and how they were using these diverse multi-species cover crop mixes and how they were just seeing all of these benefits, not only to the soil, but also to the livestock. And it was like a light kind of came on for a number of us. It's like, yeah, that's what's missing because prior to this, a diverse cover crop mix was maybe three things. Maybe oats and radish and clover was considered, a pretty diverse cover crop mix. And so when Adamir showed that, Gabe and Jay took that concept home to North Dakota. And most people have probably seen these pictures of how anything they planted in a monoculture strip just burnt to a crisp because they were very dry. This is summer of 2006. But where they planted all that stuff in a mix, it grew and it produced biomass. And nobody could figure out exactly how because they'd had like 3 inches rain for the whole year. And so there is something powerful happening with that diversity in that mix. And so we got very interested. So we did an experiment. We applied for a SARE grant, Sustainable Ag Research Education. So we got like $5,000 and we bought moisture sensors. And so we planted all these cover crops in strips and then we made several different mix combinations. And then we had moisture sensors at 1 foot, 2 foot, and 3 foot depths. And so we were monitoring those. Were pulling a reading every hour and charting it to the cloud and all of this. So this was 2008. And at the end of that summer, and we actually had decent rain that summer. So unlike the guys in North Dakota that had no rain and they could see the power of the diversity, we had pretty good rain and everything grew pretty well. But the moisture sensors told us that anything growing as a monoculture had sucked most of the moisture out of that soil profile. And so, it really dried it down. But where we had these diverse mixes, it used the water so much more efficiently, even to the point, Matt, where the plot of wheat stubble with nothing growing on it had about the same level of moisture as where we grew this wonderful diverse cover crop mix. It was just using water that efficiently. And so we didn't understand exactly all the processes that were happening then. We still don't understand all the processes, but we could see that it worked. We didn't need to understand it to know that it worked. And so we learned three things. Number one, there was great power in diversity. Number two, this seed was hard to get. We had to work pretty
Mhm.
hard to find, the 12 or 15 different things that we used. And then number three, the livestock did incredible on grazing those diverse mixes. Because we had just plots, but then the rest of this field was planted to the diverse mix. And so when we saw those things, we said, maybe we can sell this stuff. We were kind of looking for an opportunity to expand, to get the kids, but some of the older kids were thinking about, well, what am I going to do when I graduate? And so we decided to do this, start a cover crop seed company. We called it GreenCover Seed. And we felt like that was a better option for us than going out and trying to find another, 2, 3, 4,000 acres to farm. And that was in 2009 was the first year that we sold any seed. And that first year we probably sold enough seed to cover 1,000 acres, maybe, half that probably ours. And these past few years, we've moved enough seed out the door to cover well over 1 million acres every year. So it's really grown. The timing was really good. We got in just as the NRCS was starting the Secrets of the Soil campaign, and we kind of rode that wave. But because we learned so much ourselves in that first experiment, because I came from a teaching background, our premise the whole time has been if we can teach farmers how the soil functions or how it should function, the only natural conclusion that you can come to is that you have to have a growing plant to make the system work. And the only way to do that in most agricultural systems, unless you're a perennial, is you got to have cover crops. So by properly understanding how the soil works, cover crops kind of sell themselves. At least that's how we've approached it.
I totally agree. Once you understand the why behind it, it's
Mhm.
indispensable. How many, when you're talking, when you started with being talking about 3 to 4 different varieties, when I got into permaculture, I started doing seed mixes, started doing crazy seed mixes, and I saw such a reaction in the soil. And I but I also didn't grow the full diversity that I threw around and planted. And so I tapered it back, but I never saw the same level of reactions in the soil.
Mhm.
So when you said those numbers, my immediate follow-up question was, and I know that some of your seeds are tailored to different bioregions, but what's the total like menu of cover crop seeds that you offer now? What is it like over 20, over 30?
Well, definitely over 20 or over 30. We probably have over 100 annual species. Now I say that, but there may be 12 different kinds of sorghum
Right.
because there's so many different traits or characteristics: brown midrib, brachytic dwarf, photoperiod sensitive. So, I count each one of those as different because they fill a different niche.
Oh yeah.
We have over 100 different just annuals. And then, we carry some perennials, and then we of course have access to lots more perennials, but 90% of what we sell are going to be annual cover crops, for someone in a rotation where they're growing other crops as well. And so, yeah, we have almost unlimited options to put together these diverse mixes, cool season, warm season, legumes, grasses, broadleaves, you name it. If it's out there, and if somebody says, "Hey, do you have this?" And if we don't have it, we'll go try to look for it because we're interested in seeing what it would do as well. So, yeah, very diverse, and really we let people choose what they want to put in their mixes. Now we do have pre-made mixes because we've learned what kind of fits in certain situations and scenarios. So we've got some of those, for if somebody's just doing 5 acres, hey, this is going to be pretty close to what you want. But if you're doing, bigger fields, yeah, we'll work with you to customize that mix according to what we think and what you think is going to best fit your soil and your goals that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it was when I was writing regenerative soil, I would just come off this idea that this idea of five cousins. So I was trying to like inspire people to like start thinking about creating their own guilds to solve their soil problems.
Hmm.
And then I delved deeper into it when I created my cover crop chart. But you guys are at a totally different level. I love the nuance. I love how it's not just goal oriented, it's management oriented. What what's something that, like if you're growing uh, in Iowa a cover crop for corn, like what would you offer that person? Because that's probably the most common thing you get, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, again, we would ask quite a few questions about the
Mhm.
context, not just the context of the rotation, timing of when they're going to be able to get it planted, when are they going to terminate it, how are they going to terminate it, are they grazing it? So those are all important considerations. Now, for most people, they're not going to let it grow out and get super big and plant green into it and things like that. So, we can go something fairly basic. A head of corn, what we would like to do is have some sort of a cereal out there. It might be cereal rye, although there can be some challenges with that. A head of corn. Winter barley is probably a little bit better, even winter wheat. Um, if you're a little further south, you can get by with winter oats, but these are all the cereal option of that.
Mhm.
We'd love to see a legume. Ideally, you have a legume fixing some nitrogen ahead of that corn. So hairy vetch is kind of the go-to. It's the most cold hardy. We planted hairy vetch, the October 10th, and you can produce 200 pounds of nitrogen with a hairy vetch crop, but you have to wait until the end of May or the first part of June in order for it to get there. So again, if you're an organic producer, and your nitrogen is very expensive and your corn is very valuable, well, then you're probably willing to wait a couple extra weeks to get that growth. In fact, we've got organic customers right now. Everybody else has done planting corn. Some of them are just getting started because they're letting that vetch grow to produce that nitrogen. That way they don't have to go buy, chicken manure or expensive organic sources of nitrogen. So it's all
What
about
would
what your goals are.
what would be the drawback comparing like hairy vetch to like something that's so in my experience, like the vetch can like come back much easier than like peas, like a snow pea or admiral or a field pea. What, but and I also know like snow peas, they can germinate at 45 degrees. Like,
Yeah.
where's hairy vetch in that comparison?
Well, hairy vetch will germinate in the low 40s. The biggest difference is going to be in the
Okay.
winter hardiness. You get up, we're in southern Nebraska, and so, you're talking about Iowa. It's hard to get winter peas to survive the winter there. And
Right.
part of it is the growing point of a pea gets out of the ground so much faster than vetch. And if that growing point freezes, you're done. And so you got to keep that growing point protected and under the ground. I shouldn't say if it freezes, if it's exposed, to the wind and all of that. So if you keep it underground, it can survive. It pretty much all of your top growth will get lost through the winter on a pea, but then it will regrow, from that root system it's developed, and that can be pretty good. And we've seen 200 pounds of nitrogen produced from peas as well. It's just not nearly as consistent. And
Okay.
also, to the best chance to get a winter pea to overwinter, you need to be planting that thing deep. Well, I'm talking 3 inches deep if you can,
Okay.
because again, you got to keep the growing point protected, and so that makes it difficult to put winter peas in a mix with, rye or camelina or rapeseed, something like that, because those
Even
things really
harder on
don't
the
want to be planted
soil.
3 inches deep.
Right. So it's harder
But the
on the
vetch,
soil.
the vetch can go in at an inch, with all that other stuff. And so that's it. For the most part, it's all going to be about winter survivability. As you move south, you have a lot more options.
Yeah.
Crimson clover, wonderful option if you're far enough south for it to survive. It survives maybe 20% of the time up here where we're at. And if you have snow cover, everything will survive. All of those I talked about. But if you don't have snow cover and you get 20 below and the wind is howling, it's a pretty rough environment.
Sucks all that moisture right out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So,
So
so again, ahead of corn, we would want to see some diversity, but sometimes it just gets so late in the season. The only thing that you can really make sense to plant is cereal rye, and that's still better than nothing.
yeah.
And so, we're not opposed to guys going out there and just planting one thing if it's the only thing that makes sense. And rye ahead of corn, like I say, there can be some risks with that. It's mostly all in the nutrient cycling. You'll have all your nitrogen tied up with that rye, which that's rye's job. That's what it's really good at. It's what it does. So you just have to manage your early season nutrients really closely if you're doing that type of system.
Yeah, I've been spoiled where I've been growing. I grew in California initially and then
Ah,
Washington, and the harsh winters of Texas have been a lesson. And the harsh summers. The first summer here it was over 100 degrees for 2.5 months straight, and they banned watering gardens in our county.
mm.
And so that was a hard uphill battle.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. Because you're
So
because you're in the Austin area, right?
yeah, I'm south of Austin,
Yeah.
and it just cooked. And right now, it's pretty amazing. It's like the sweet spot right now. It's still hot during the day, but it gets cool in the morning and in the
Yeah.
evening. It's lovely. So let's take it the opposite. What's one of the most diverse, cover crop mixes that you've seen go out, and what's the context?
Great question. So, I mean, we've got a lot of people that will put together some really diverse blends. To get the maximum amount of diversity, it's really more about the time of the year that you're planting, because obviously you can't plant prior to your frost, your last frost date. You can't put the warm season stuff in. Number one, they won't come up in the cool soils, and number two, if they did, they would freeze off. And so you're not going to see that in those really early months. So, there it's mostly all cool season things: oats, peas, barley, clovers, brassicas, things like that. And if you're planting, if you're looking at 100 degrees for a month or 2 months, you're not going to see a lot of cool season things do very well in that. So that's almost all warm season stuff there. So where we really see the diversity is when you get kind of into that later summer type time frame. So for Nebraska, first week of August is we love planting cover crops then, because we can combine the two families. We can get cool season, we can get oats and peas, radishes, turnips, clovers. It's still pretty warm, but the days are getting shorter, the nights are getting cooler, and that really helps those plants survive. But we still have enough heat units in August and September. I can get good growth on my sorghum and my millet and my sun hemp and my cowpeas and the sunflower and the buckwheat. So that's really that sweet spot of where I can combine the two seasons, the warm seasons and the cool seasons. Yeah, and that's where it really makes sense. You could put a 40-way blend together and plant it in March. It just wouldn't make sense. You'd be wasting your money on some of those things that just simply don't work. And so we love diversity, but only if it makes sense. And so you've got to look at your the geographic, your climate factors. You got to look at when are you planting, how are you terminating, and then mostly you got to look at what are your goals, what are you trying to accomplish, to know whether or not all that diversity makes sense, or which part of the diversity is going to make sense. And kind of what I like to tell people is that the tighter your time frame to get something planted and get it to grow, the less diverse your mixes are going to be. So, example, if I'm planting October 10th instead of August 10th, I don't have nearly as many things that make sense. Number two, the more specific your goal is, the less diverse your mix is going to be. Again, if your goal is to produce 200 pounds of nitrogen ahead of organic corn, very totally legitimate goal. People do it all the time. Well, we're going to load you up with a whole bunch of vetch and other cool season legumes, and that's okay. That's meeting the context of your goal. But if your goal is to, just general soil health, I really want to boost my biological community. I want really great grazing for my animals. That's where we can really start branching out and saying, okay, how many plant families, can I get, five, six, seven different plant families represented out there? And the answer is yes, a lot of times we can. And so, again, a lot of it involves context. So we like to see, to be considered a diverse mix, in my opinion, it should have at least 8 to 10, maybe up to 12 different species. But then we would want to see that represent at least 5 or 6 families. And what a lot of people don't understand is that all of the legumes, and there's, we probably have 50 legumes, but that's all one plant family.
Right.
And all of the grasses, all those sorghums, millets, oats, rye, barley, all of those, that's a second plant family. And then all of the brassicas, we probably have 12 to 15 different types of brassicas, radishes, turnips, collards, mustards, rapeseed, kale, all those. That's one plant family. So now I could have 12 different things, but only 3 plant families. Well, that's not nearly as diverse if I had 12 things and 6 plant families. And so when we get into the broadleaf category, so flax is a different plant family than what buckwheat is, and that's different than what sunflowers is, and that's different than what okra is, and that's different than what sesame is. So we really build the diversity when we get into that category. And, Christine Jones and others have shown us that it doesn't take a lot. You don't have to have 30 pounds of something to have good representation, but it needs to be in there to have, the root exudates from that plant family to support additional diversity of biology to really bring that quorum sensing that I know you talk about a lot in some of your work. You need the diversity of root exudates if you're going to get the diversity of biology to bring the room to a quorum, if you will.
So speaking of that precisely, do you have a percentage limit on the mixes for brassicas? Considering the biofumigation properties of them, and then the same goes for nitrogen fixers. Do you have a percentage of the mix that you're like, you might want to go over that because you'll
Sure.
start doing exactly what Dr. Christine Jones warns about, right?
Yeah. Again, it depends on the goals. So I'm working with some potato growers right now in Colorado, and their goal is to try to combat nematodes. So that's going to be a pretty high percentage because
Yeah.
that's their goal. That's what we need to do. It's not going to necessarily benefit a lot of their other soil health, but that's a very real production goal that they have. So, it may be as much as 50, 60% brassicas and something like that. Generally, we don't like to see that over 2 to 3 pounds an acre. And when you talk about percentages, it's
Okay.
always a little bit of a question. Is that by weight or is that by number of seeds? Because I can have a 50-pound mix and have 2 pounds of brassicas. Well, that's 4%
Right.
by weight, but it may be 30% by seeds because those things are 180,000 seeds per pound.
Yeah.
And so what we've done, and we've got the Smart Mix calculator tool online that you can go and, people can set up a free account and it helps them build a mix. when we look at what effect that particular species has on the overall makeup of the mix, we're doing what we call the effective percentage, and it's an average of the percent by pounds and the percent by seeds. Because using either
Oh,
one of
wow.
those isn't completely accurate. So if I'm 4% by weight and 30% by seeds, well, that's 34. So the average is 17. So now I'm going to say those brassicas are about 17% of our mix. Yeah, probably you go out there and you look and it's like, yeah, that's probably close. So it's not perfect, but it's probably the closest system that we could come up with that was, relatively easy to pull off, inside of a tool and to
Yeah,
get people to understand, what you're looking at there. So, yeah,
that's
with
amazing.
brassicas, we don't want to go over, 2, 3, maybe 4 pounds in some scenarios of brassicas. Legumes really depends on your goal. As we learn more and more, and as we listen to Dr. Jones and others, we're learning that we don't have to have a huge amount of legumes to still have good nitrogen fixing potential. We used to think that was the only way to do it. Of course, now, we know that there are, azospirillums and zotobacters and bacillus. There's all manner of other free living nitrogen fixers that can work with plants other than just legumes. And so, we probably would hesitate to go over 20 to 25% legumes unless there's a real specific reason to do so. And again, sometimes there are legitimate reasons why you would, but generally that 20 to 25%, partially because the legumes are by far the most expensive part of the seed mix. Legumes, anything that yields less is going to cost more. And so, soybeans will yield 60 bushels an acre. Corn is 200. Well, soybeans are, worth 2.5 to 3 times more than corn because you have to do that in order to get the acres. And it's the same way in cover crops. Your clovers and your cowpeas are always going to be more expensive than your grains and your pulses because they just yield less. And so, that's kind of what we look at as well. We'll try to limit that. Just simply to, make the cost manageable for people as well.
I think part of that is that so when I was researching and came up with that concept, and it really was a demonstrative concept for like oxidative alkaline soils. So I had like amaranth in there. It was California, and but I had buckwheat and I had daikon radish. Daikon radish sops up all the available nitrogen that it can. And then buckwheat actually, like I read that it steals from the cowpeas and causes the cowpea to like double down and in other words become more efficient. And that competition, I was
Are you
like, it's
talking
like,
about the nitrogen?
yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
makes the cowpeas double down on drawing down nitrogen. And I was like, they're like cousins egging each other on, you know.
Yeah, and I do think that's true, but I think that really only works and is effective if that system is colonized with mycorrhizal fungi,
Oh
because
yeah.
otherwise the transfer of those nutrients is so difficult. Root to root is not going to happen without having the bridge or the network of the mycorrhiza. And so I think we see that so much more in really healthy soils that are highly colonized with mycorrhiza. I don't know that you see that very much in soils that have very low populations of mycorrhiza.
That's a really, really good point. I, yeah, that's a really, really good point. I always inoculate everything. So that's kind of like a given when I do it. But man,
Yeah, but there's a lot of soils that have histories of tillage, histories of really harsh chemical use,
true.
histories of long periods of fallow. All those things are just really detrimental to mycorrhizal populations. And so, you're just not going to see that. Now, we do have mycorrhiza inoculant, and we certainly, can put that on people's seeds. But again, that's an added cost. And so, a
The
lot of
best place
times
for it.
when, yeah, when people come to buy cover crops, they're like, well, I'm not harvesting this. I'm not selling it. I'm not getting, they don't see that immediate cash return. So then they try to lowball, my budget's $15 an acre. It's like,
Okay, well then let me help right now because Keith, cover crops are the best possible opportunity to add in mycorrhizal fungi
yeah,
because if you put it on the seed, the moment that root comes out, it's partnering with the fungi and they stay in tandem, so you get 100% inoculation or
hmm
80 to 100%, which is a full inoculation. And so you get, and then those, if you're doing no-till, those roots are still there next year, and
yeah,
that's your inoculant for next year. So it's resurrecting from those dead roots. It is
yeah.
regenerative, and that's where the word comes
It's a
from.
great, it's a host plant. They're donor
Yeah.
plants for your cash crop.
And
So,
it's so effective because if you do a diversity of roots, you have it all inoculated, it will create a diversity of levels and types of storage, and you don't need to like think about that any longer. It's a 30 to 40% increase in yield. And then I know I used the Y word, but 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 it's also all these benefits that are at every step of the way of the health of the plant, like its way it handles water, the way it handles heat stress, the way it handles UV light, the way all of it because it is the plant. So
yeah,
mycorrhizal fungi is literally the gut biome, the root biome of
yeah.
the plant. So if you took, and many of us are dealing with mold, I mean, candida, we know people, if they're on antifungals for 3 months, they're sick. If
hmm
they're on it permanently, they'll die.
Yeah.
And that's what we've done with our soils. And if we just bring back this one type of fungi, it will give us so many benefits and it doesn't go away if you treat it right.
Yeah, it jumps host to host to host, and and again, that's why, I mean, we know brassicas aren't a great host plant, so we would never want to do a
Trichoderma.
full-blown cover crop with just brassicas because there's no place for those guys to live.
But if you combine trichoderma with our muscular mycorrhizal fungi, they actually can enter into brassicas. So
Hmm.
trichoderma, so that's why it's like certain companies um like these guys recharge. You can see
Okay.
it right on here. Trichoderma harzianum, and you can look up Trichoderma harzianum, and you'll find that it's the thing that
So they help
allows.
to colonize those brassicas then. Huh.
Yeah,
Really,
yeah.
that's really
So
interesting. Yeah, that's great.
and then if you need like a tip on or connection to pure trichoderma cultures, I have a friend, Bokashi Earthworks, does that. So I could help you with that aspect. But man, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
want you guys to cover crop the world. And the thing with me is I am a permaculture guy, and that literally means we go to the areas that are so marginalized and disturbed or just not even for growing, and we try to grow food because this is the land we can afford. I'm part of a whole generation of people like this. And so farmers are already looking for soil that's suitable to begin with, but I have no soil. And so I end up doing cover crops year round. And so I got into doing cowpeas and buckwheat and all these warmer things,
hmm Yep.
especially in Northern California, with the coastal influence buffering things out. I could do, a lot of things. I was even doing like in summer underneath the canopy of all those plants, including sorghum and amaranth and corn. I was doing heads of cauliflower. So
Yeah.
it was so easy. It was so amazing.
Because you
But
change that microclimate under the canopy.
yeah, and I figured out that our winter crops, some of them are driven by heat, but most of them are driven by joules of light. And so it's literally the energy. And so if you give them super shade, like they actually can grow. And so anyway, but my point is it's like I am a perma cover cropper and it's the only way I've been able to even get anywhere because the soil is everything. And instead of doing a cover crop and then planting and getting what I got that summer, I would interplant in my cover summer cover crop to get something because otherwise I would never get to year 5 and have unbelievable soil, or year 3 in some areas. But where I'm at now, it's beach sand. It's like prehistoric beach sand, and it literally looks like we could buy it at Home Depot. And it's just all bacteria. So
Yeah. Yeah, so a great example of that. So we work with Dr. Grant Woods. So we've started selling a lot of food plot seed to deer hunters. And so Grant Woods, growing deer, so he's in the Ozark Mountains, just north of Branson. Crappy, crappy land. I mean,
yeah.
Ozark Mountain rock hillsides, basically, because it had all been farmed at one time and all that topsoil washed away. And
Hmm.
so, you buy this land cheap because that's what you can afford, right? But there's no soil there. Well, he started, doing diverse, cover mixes for the deer food plots and started using biologicals. And, I've been out to his place and you put a soil probe down and I promise you, you will hit rocks. But when you pull the soil up that's in between the rocks, it's like 6% organic matter now. It's incredible.
That's
And the rocks are
amazing.
getting swallowed up. They're getting covered up because he's building, from the bottom up. And it's beautiful to see what biology can do. And he hasn't used fertilizers and hasn't used herbicides and just the power of the plant and the power of the bug. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, and those deer, right?
Oh yeah, and his deer are they're bigger, they're healthier. In fact, he sent some of his deer loins in and had Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, at Utah, did a nutrient profile of it, and just the amount of nutrient density in that was pretty amazing. Even better than some of the best grass-fed beef that they've tested.
That's the first time I've heard of that cover cropping, like the forest essentially. But that's really, so much of the forest management is just like, don't touch it, hands off, except for the part where they're like trapping bald eagles. Uh, I don't get that one. But in California, it was notorious. They were like, oh, it's on fire, don't touch it. Yeah, what I mean? It's gonna burn these houses. I don't know if we should intervene. It's like, wait, what? And it just we need to get our hands in the ground and make things better and make things right.
Yeah,
And we can't do it all at once. It's a humbling process.
yeah,
And
no,
so line upon line, year upon year, season upon season, and it's
yeah.
cover crops, that pulse of cover crops that does it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Matt. And I did a talk on this earlier this year at our Regenerative Nexus event. Just looking at the concept of biblical dominion, God gave Adam and Eve dominion over the garden and, told them to, essentially master it. Well, some people take that to mean that we can exploit it and do whatever we want to with it. But really what it means is to take care of it, to
Yeah.
to nurture it, to protect it. And you can't do that unless you're intentionally doing things to make it better. You can't just say, I'm not going to touch it and let's just see what happens. Nature will build soil, but very, very slowly. But when we work with the tools that God has given us and the natural processes, we can build it really quickly, as you've seen, as
Yeah.
so many of our customers have seen. So, yeah, when we are purposely planting the right things and we're purposely exhibiting really good grazing management or rotational management, we can greatly, greatly accelerate how fast soil builds, how fast we can regenerate these broken ecosystems. We can bring them back, but it takes high levels of management, and that doesn't come by just sitting back and letting nature's processes, go unabated without our help.
Especially when we're doing agriculture, because we are taking from the land when we do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
You
We're
know,
extracting some, so we have to make sure we're good stewards of putting more back. Because the only way you can be regenerative is if you're putting more in than what you're taking out. And if you're going to take
absolutely.
some out, you got to put even more in. And a lot of what's getting put in is carbon from the atmosphere. energy from the sun, nitrogen from the atmosphere, the minerals from the soil. So it's not like we have to buy it and put it in, but we
We can
have to
grow it.
manage it in such a way that the things that our soil needs, the plants need, the biology needs, is being provided.
And I don't think we can do it without cover crops. I mean, just
Well, neither
looking.
do we.
Well, I mean, like the five keys to regenerative soil in my book and everything, like one of those things is photosynthesis and roots.
Yeah,
And it's like you can't get around not like you can't replace that. You like compost can't do it. Like if you're like, oh no, we'll just make the compost, add that in, and we'll get the organic matter. And no, actually, plants and roots do it in such a different way. It
yeah,
releases it at the size that creates structure. It is not unstructured that then needs to be structured, which is what compost is. And it just, you don't get there without this, and you don't build soil without this process because, and you don't avoid the Fenton reaction. So, one of the biggest things that I teach, with regenerative soil is like natural consequences, cause and effect,
hmm,
and it's like bare soil gases off the nitrogen and the carbon and it causes the EH to go up and the pH to go up, and so you get oxidized alkaline soils.
temperature to go up and
hmm
mhm.
And so we literally every time we leave that soil bare in Iowa, end of the season, every time we're doing all this stuff, like even if it's not super hot out, it is oxidizing, it is desiccating, and without cover crop, those gaps don't get filled. And I know there's biology, there's all these other aspects, but there's no way to replace cover
Yeah.
crops.
I wish that I mean carbon gets such a bad name. I often say carbon needs a better PR agent because it's the whipping boy of
Yeah.
everything that's wrong with our planet. But I wish every person that had a real concern about climate and global warming, I wish they would watch. There's a great, and I'm sure you've seen it, there's this great video from NASA that is showing atmospheric CO2 levels throughout the course of a whole year. And there's different colors for different levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. And what is just so stunning in that, starts in January, and of course those levels are red and they're pretty high. But, as you get into the growing season of April and May, those things go way down. And as we're growing all these crops, they stay way down. And then as soon as those crops, corn, soybeans mainly, but as soon as those, start to senesce and they start to die, those levels spike way back up. And if you watch that and go, okay, if we could add, of the area that is not red, showing low CO2 levels, if we could add a month on the front end and a month on the back end, what would that do? Well, that would be pretty amazing, because you really only got about 4 months in there where it's pretty low. Well, now if we stick to, another month, 6 weeks or whatever on each end, makes a huge difference. And that's what cover crops are doing. They're growing when those other crops aren't, and they're pulling that CO2 out of the atmosphere, keeping those levels low, and sticking it into the ground where it belongs in the first place. So it's a powerful, powerful video if you understand what it's showing. It's a great video.
It really is. When they're tilling, that's when the spike is, and
Oh,
when they're
through the
spraying,
roof, through the roof.
and that late season where everything that's when they desiccate. So
Yeah,
everyone's like, "Oh, Roundup desiccant. This will be the thing that allows me to have timeliness and punctuality and make it easy for me and my process and delivery." But what happens is by drying something out so quickly, I mean, of course it's going to be poisoned and toxic for everyone who eats it. Not even going to get into that side of it.
let's don't
Uh,
even mention that, right?
right. That's a nightmare. We all know about that though. But when they desiccate it like that, they're literally are jettisoning that moisture, that CO2, and a lot of those
The
micronutrients.
leaf endophytes, everything. Yeah,
Yeah, and then of course, if it is Roundup, which is most likely is Roundup that they're doing this with, then it's a chelator. It's going to lock up all the nutrients. So
yeah.
then, so suddenly the food's not even nutritious.
But other than that, Matt, what's wrong with it?
But if we have these cover crops in there instead, and you're disturbing that prior season, planting this cover crop in it, maybe you're crimping it down, maybe you're doing the that tiller that opens up and just plants right there, the strip tillage that we talked about at Regenerative Nexus. Maybe you're doing that. So now your main crop becomes the coverage, and then your cover crop goes in. And what you've done by crimping it down, by pushing it aside, by not macerating it, not flail mowing it, and this I learned from Ray Archuleta at the first Regenerative Nexus that I attended with you is that you slow down the entire process.
Mhm.
And what we've learned through carbon sequestration studies in the temperate and the cold temperate and the humid temperate, the reason they have way more carbon in their soils is because everything's slowed
Slower
down.
systems, yeah.
Yeah, and so an ectomycorrhizal fungi literally messages the sacrifice to slow it down. So we know that's the mechanism. It's just allowing things to build up faster because we're moving slower. So if we do that with the breakdown of our crops and we still get that seed in the ground in a timely fashion, learning techniques at Regenerative Nexus, we then stop that spike of release, and it will release, but it will be a slow and steady release, and it's
Hmm.
layers. So that CO2 is released, and then there's microbes that eat that above it in that mass of biomass. And so you're cycling CO2 in situ at the microbial level, even as that breaks down.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be the way I see us really changing those spikes and essentially removing them. Because, I mean, we have to, especially because people are going to start testing more and more and then realizing, oh, this is the thing causing all my problems. We need to get out of the food chain. And
Yeah.
because it's part of the management right now for people and they're dependent upon it, they gotta switch. They gotta get ready.
And don't you think, Matt, that's a pretty valuable life lesson there too. Just, you look at how many of us, and I put myself in this category sometimes too, we try to live life absolutely as fast as we can. Go, 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 run, run, run. I mean, we're desiccating our life so we can get to the next thing even faster and even quicker. And what are we doing? We're burning ourselves out.
Mm.
Whereas if we have that little bit slower, a little bit longer, a little bit more relaxed type of schedule, we're going to be building up that resiliency that you just talked about that comes from those systems. I love how life mimics, how God created nature to to work so often. And that's one of the lessons I see there is that when you're living such a high-paced, fast life, you're going to burn out just like you're burning out the soil.
Yeah, there's a term that has come up from within this week, the sabbatical.
Hmm.
And I have this desire to unplug from social media, to read books and to write and to study and just to take time to get closer with God and nature and to go on a sabbatical, take that break to just reconnect.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've read this book or not, but you should really read it. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, by John
Mm.
Mark Comer. It's I should read it again, but I don't want to because it's too convicting. So, but it's just really, really good about slowing down and how to take that. And here's a question I get asked, Matt, from time to time. In fact, somebody asked me this just a couple weeks ago. In the Bible, it talks about, God had the Hebrews take a Sabbath year. Every seventh year, you weren't to harvest a crop. And so they asked me how I think about that. What do I feel about that? And most of us aren't going to be able to take every seventh year off from not taking any production off the land. And first thing I say is, we're no longer under that covenant, but that was given for a reason. There's good reason for that, and it's to allow that land to rest. And so, one of the things that as I thought about this, what if instead of resting our land, and by the way, a lot of people go, well, resting, that means, you do nothing. You just let it lay bare, let it lay fallow. Well, that's the furthest thing from rest for land. Fallow, the Bible doesn't say to leave it lay fallow. It just says not to harvest off of it. And so what if instead of doing 1 year out of every seven, what if we did 1/7 of every year? So if you take
Mm,
365 and you divide it by seven, you get 52 days. And 52 days is, because when people say, well, how long does a cover crop have to grow to get, the majority of the benefits? And I think it's 7 to 8 weeks, which is just about 52 days. So if every year you could grow a cover crop and you have that 52-day period where it's growing and it's putting things into the soil and you don't remove any of that. That's the rest is not taking, it's all giving. I think we're fulfilling what the purpose of that original covenant was, or at least one of the purposes, maybe not all of them, but and so I see that as resting your land that 1/7 of the time.
that's amazing. That's really incredible. I always was taught that the reason fallow was effective and no longer became it stopped being effective at a certain point because everyone's fields was surrounded by a forest.
Hmm.
And then eventually fields were cheek and jowl with other fields, and you didn't have the animals move back into that field and like reclaim it
Yeah.
and refertilize it and bring in all the seeds from all over. So that might be part of it, and because those blessings, those natural blessings, are now absent in a lot of places. If you're in the suburbs of Connecticut, you got deer just like moving like a train through your backyard. So they're bringing Lyme disease, but we used to have a system that wasn't in balance. We used to have a system that was, all these visitors were blessings.
Mhm.
All these interactions were blessings, and
Yeah.
we got to get back to that.
And we can mimic some of that with properly managed livestock. And that's why, that's such an important soil health principle. I always make sure I say properly managed integrated livestock because if you don't properly manage them, that'll send your soil health backwards in a hurry. So you
Oh
have
yeah.
to manage it in such a way that you're bringing in the benefits without exporting too much. You can't graze it bare and expect that to be a healthy thing for that soil. It's not a restful thing for that soil if your animals are consuming everything.
I was just thinking, going back to the earlier part of the conversation, the benefits to cattle are so profound, and so many people in regenerative ag are using animals to clean up after. How much of just the cattle world, just we raise beef, we raise, sheep, like how much of that world is doing cover crops effectively right now? Is it just beginning for them?
Well, for some, certainly for some, I would say that from our customer base, I think well over half the cover crops that we sell which, we sell, I don't know, 30, 35 million pounds a year. Over half of that is planted with the intention of it being grazed.
That's amazing.
So pretty significant, pretty sizable. And part of that is because the cattle guy, the sheep guy, the livestock person, you can see an immediate return on investment from that. And so, that just makes sense. You can do that. But there's still a lot of livestock folks out there that haven't figured that out, or we've got cropping guys, so much of it has been segmented and separated, but
Yeah.
we've got cropping guys here, and you got livestock guys over here, and the livestock guys looking at the cropping guys cover crop going, man, I would love to graze that. And so again, part of regenerative agriculture is rebuilding and restoring relationships. So let's restore relationships between those neighbors. And the cowboy has to be willing to pay a fair price. You can't pay the same price that you're used to grazing corn stalks, which is next to nothing. You've
Right.
got to pay a fair price because that's really high quality, really valuable forage. You need to make it worth this guy's time and vice versa. And so I think there can be some really great synergism there. But then the livestock guy, he can't you can't take it all. You can't graze it all. Otherwise, the cropping guy is going to see that actually hurt me and sent my soil health backwards. So I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah.
And so it has to be a good and proper understanding. But when that works, and we've seen it work with customers, it's a beautiful system and it works really, really well.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. I I rely heavily upon really good meat. That's like the bulk of my diet. I've basically had to eliminate almost every food in my diet as my Crohn's has been like, no longer can you eat that, and then no longer can you eat that, you know. So simple things I can eat, and meat's one of those. And so I can now sense like the quality of meat when I eat it like very quickly.
Mhm.
And so the I know how important it is to so many other people too, and they don't even know it. You know, they're just eating this, Costco meat from Brazil or New Zealand, you
Yeah.
know. And meanwhile, it's the guy, on the other side of town who's growing the best meat they could possibly eat.
Yeah, that's
So,
right. And of all of the things that a regenerative farmer can get direct to the consumer, meat protein is going to be one of the easiest because it has some shelf life. It's not like I'm growing lettuce, you've got to eat it within 3 days of me harvesting it. That's a tough market.
yeah.
But meat, you can freeze it, you can do different things to preserve it. That's relatively easy, and I think it's available almost everywhere now. But you have to go look for it, but just do some Google search. Most of these guys have an online presence of some sort. It might be on Facebook, they might have a website, but you have to do more than just drive to Costco to find it. And so the consumer who's really interested in that, I'm convinced that they can find it, even if they have to go a little ways to get it. It will be worth it. And then as more consumers do that, then more producers will produce. And we've got to bring both sides of the supply chain up at the same time. We can't overproduce and we can't underproduce. We've got to bring the consumer demand along with the production kind of up at the same time in order to not crash that market.
I think it's going to come down to like handheld devices, and then or not necessarily maybe the customer, but the producer. And then they're going to be
Yeah.
like, oh, this is nutrient density here. This is,
Yeah.
and that's going to drive a totally new
Yeah.
way of
But
shopping.
but if that consumer can go in with their phone and scan it and
Yeah.
go, oh yeah, this scan this. Oh well, this one's better here. It's worth that extra 50 cents a pound or whatever it is.
Or
That will
$2.
change the market. I mean, that'll drive the market better than anything, and that's how the free market works. That's how it's supposed to work.
That's
It doesn't always
exactly
work that
right.
way because we have things that interrupt the free market, but that's how it should work, and hopefully will. When you put the power of decision making truly in the hands of the consumer, they'll make the right choices.
That's what I feel too. I feel like we're so close to breaking this system, and it's a system of deception, and that's why they will change when they know the truth.
Yeah. The
And,
truth will
and
set you free.
right, right, and it will heal us. So I'm so thankful, Keith, for you coming on here. Where can folks learn more about you and learn more about cover crops from you all? Because I know you have a lot of educational material.
Yep, we've got tons and tons of resources. So first place to start would be our website. It's just www.greencover.com. You can get all of so we've got all of these, we put out a different resource guide every year. We're working on the next one, but there's tons of good articles. These are all archived on our website. You can download the whole PDF too if you want. We've got all kinds of other information on there. So the website, and then the other one would be our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and just search for Green Cover Seed. We've got over 400 videos on there, and we're putting more on all the time. We started a podcast, so once we get down the road, Matt, we'll have you on our podcast as well, because I like to say we just have really interesting conversations with the thought leaders, both on the production side as well as the industry and expert side. So yeah, there's so much information out there, folks. If you don't know something, it's probably because you haven't put the effort into trying to find it. And then our phone number, our emails are on the website. Reach out to us. We're happy to help people. That's what we're here for.
And when's the next in-person event that you got going? Because
Yeah.
your
So
in-person events are some of the best in America, in all of North America, I would say. So
Well, we like
folks,
to think so. So I don't know when this episode will air, but June 3rd and 4th, Nicole Masters is coming to our farm for 2 days. In fact, right now the guys are putting up a tent. We're going to have a tent where we're calling it's going to be the Big Tent Soil Health Revival. So we're in this big tent at the edge of the field. All the instruction will happen there, and then we'll go right out, right outside the tent door into the plots and into the fields. So that's going to be a 2 day pretty intense workshop for learning. We'll have our free summer field days in August. I think it's like August 6th and 9th, or I don't remember the dates. It'll be on our website, but you can come and tour over 100 different types of cover crop plots.
wow.
We'll have corn interseeding demonstrations, grazing demonstrations, and those are completely free events to come to. And then we will have our Southeast Kansas Soil Health Conference will be at our facility in Iola, Kansas. That will be in December. And then, of course, we have the Regenerative Nexus events that we've mentioned a couple times. That'll be January again in Scottsdale and February in Omaha next year as well. So all that information will be on our website or just reach out to us. We'll be happy to have you there. But we put a lot of time, effort, and money into these events because it's the best way to learn. In-person learning.
Incredible. Yeah. Yeah, I have been doing this work from Gardner and then from like John Kemp introducing me more to the farming side of it. But it felt like I was taken from like an area where I was playing in puddles and then like thrown in the deep end. And there are farmers who have 200,000 acres and farmers have way more. There are farmers doing radical things that are being adopted all over the world because their techniques are just like rewriting viticulture or it was nonstop. I was writing names down, I was writing notes down, and and adding things to put in the next edition of my book. And yeah, yeah. Like going back to the whole sabbatical thing. If I do go on a sabbatical, I'm definitely going to be not missing my these events because it is these events spending time with Ray Archuleta, spending. I'm really close friends with Todd Harrington now.
Hmm.
You
Yep.
you know I started going to your events and then I got to meet all these people who are on the cutting edge, and then to have Todd really kind of just put take me under his wing, and
There's so much knowledge and so much
incredible.
wisdom there. And Matt, the thing and I know of no other sector that's like this. The people in this regenerative movement are so willing to share their information and their knowledge. I mean, they just live for that.
Yeah,
Whether it's a farmer or the consultant, they want to share that information. They're not trying to, it's not a secret. They want other people to know. They want other people to do these techniques as well, because that's how we're going to move the needle is when we all do it together.
absolutely. Well, Keith, I can't say it enough. I appreciate you and the work that you're doing and your family and the work that you are all doing so very much. And just thank you. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for the work you do. And I will see you at the next event.
Sounds great, Matt. Thank you. Thanks for having me on. We'll have you on our podcast soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you.